and welcome to another adventure in Australian literature. Today I'm bringing you a writer that I have actually spoken about, Kate Grenville. But before we start with that, remember we have a shop, and if you want to support us, that's where you support us. No Patreon, no advertising, no sponsors, just a shop. And in our shop we have these really nifty templates. This is a creating characters from tarot cards. This one is also free as a digital download when you sign up for our newsletter, which there is a link down below for. So yeah, think about that. These also have free shipping in Australia-wide. These have free shipping. They're laminated, they're nice. We also have t-shirts. There are about 5-6 designs of the t-shirts. Really nice, really comfortable. All original designs. Okay. And we have books. We have this book, which will help you write the Great Australian Novel. And yes, there is still enough time in the year for you to get that first draft done. We've still got a quarter of the year to go, so how about try it? Quarter of the year, you'll have a whole first draft written of your novel. Think about that. We have this book, which is a sci-fi comedy. It is incredibly funny. This book is set in rural Australia in the 1960s. It's one woman's drive into town and back again, and at the same time it is the story of their whole community. So check that one out if you want to, if that interests you. We have this one, which is funny verse and poems. So if that sounds like fun, check that out. And finally, we have this book, which is a historical fiction set in Katoomba during the First World War. It's not really war as in external war, it's what war is doing to the home front community. So there you go, try that out. And now back to our novel. And our novel is Joan Makes History. I've had this one sitting on my bookcase for some time, and I finally picked her up and read her. She's really interesting. Now, this is carrying on from our My Brilliant Career video. I thought I would have a go, do a run of Australian women writers writing Australian women. And the reason I thought I'd go with this one next is it touches on very, very similar themes to My Brilliant Career, that of making history, wanting to be something in the world as a woman. And it's thinking about how we define history. Now, Sibylla Melville is not questioning how history is defined, because at that time she just wanted to break out of those restrictions of history, of this is what is allowable for women, and that's all. 100 years later, when women have the vote, have parliamentary representation, there are female members of parliament at this time. By the time this was written, hadn't quite got to our first prime minister, but on our way there, definitely on our way there. Women have equal pay for equal work. Thank you, Mr. Wettling. Women have freedoms that Sibylla Melville would have killed for, that Miles Franklin desperately wanted. This is a late 20th century novel. But it's also a novel that comes out of our reappraisal of what and who is history, which is really, really interesting. Now, Joan is both a character who runs all the way through the novel. Joan is also the spirit of women throughout history. So there is Joan, the narrative focus in this novel, who is the daughter of immigrants from Eastern Europe. I think her mother is definitely from Romania. I think her father is too. So they're Romanian migrants at the beginning of the 20th century. And so this Joan is born in Australia at the beginning of the 20th century to migrant parents. A very, very, very common beginning for many Australians. First generation Australians, we always have first generation Australians because we are a country of migration and people are coming here, settling here, making a life here, and then making Australia different. Every different wave of migration changes the country. And Joan comes here at a time when the majority of the migration is British. So she has quite a culture clash. She is living in a migrant community because that is what happens when you have a migration country. People do stay within a community, at least in that initial migration period. The migrant families generally stay with other migrant families because they speak the same language, they have a similar cultural background. It's perfectly natural. If you were to emigrate somewhere else, you would end up staying with other expatriate migrant people, simply because as much as you wish to know and learn this new country, it's also quite hard to let go of the old country. And she sees her parents, the pull of the old country with her parents. So although her father learns to speak English very fluently, his English is very formal and a little bit unconventional to the other Australians. See, they're a weird mob. Remember that? Her mother never masters English properly, and she, as her child, who is a first-generation Australian, who is, being first-generation Australian, she is bilingual in this, and so she spends a lot of her childhood helping her mother in stores to get what she needs. Her mother never fully feels confident or any mastery over the new language of the country that her and her husband have come to. So that's the Joan of the bulk of the narrative. Now the other Joans, because all the women throughout history in this are called Joan. There is a Joan who is smuggled, as it were, aboard the HMS Endeavour with Captain Cook's wife. This is fiction, remember, guys, so don't go and blah. Just please don't. And so you have that Joan. You have a Joan who is a convict who decides that she is going to be the first foot on this new land that she's been dragged to, and jumps out of the boat and swims ashore and is then apprehended by, obviously, she doesn't attempt to run, she just wants to make history, she wants to be the first white foot on this settlement. There is a Joan who's come as a migrant and as an early settler. There is an Aboriginal Joan who meets Matthew Flinders in South Australia, or what will become South Australia. There is a Joan who recounts a massacre. There is a Joan who is a mixed descent Indigenous woman who takes to travelling. She takes herself off and escapes into the network of multiple ways of travelling, train and boat and different things. There is a Joan who photographs Ned Kelly. She never once mentions the name Ned Kelly, and Ned Kelly is not the focus of that chapter, but an incident. A family from Glenrowan turn up, and if you know the Ned Kelly story, and Kate Grenville is absolutely assuming an Australian audience is going to get this reference, that this family from Glenrowan have turned up. Among them, this young man who has swept his hair back, wet his hair and swept it back, and he's wearing a green sash. I'll see if I can find it. He's wearing a green sash, and the green sash is particularly important to Ned because he won it. He was given it as a reflection of bravery when he saved another boy from drowning. So he makes sure that this sash, he's wearing it and it's photographed. But that isn't the extreme focus of that particular Joan's part in history. There is the wife of a minor governor. There is a mayor's wife who's in Melbourne for the Federation ceremony. It's where the country began as a country rather than as a series of colonies. And so these Joans, and Joan herself, who this first generation migrant who wants to make history. What's history? Over and over and over again in this book, the question is, what is history? Is history the big, showy men and women in their fancy dresses, but mostly the men? Is it the showy men in their brocade and all their fancy stuff? Or is history ordinary people? Who makes history? Is the history of a first generation migrant who marries because she got pregnant? She's actually, the other thing about this story, which links it to the ones that I've done before, is Joan and Duncan, who she marries, are friends of Lillian. They go to university together. So that's a way of dating this in terms of when this is happening. Because in the Joan narrative, there are no dates. You are left to work out where are we exactly. She doesn't put a pin in that and give you exact dates there. You're left with context clues, and when you've read Lillian's story, you know, oh, okay, so she must, like Lillian, have been born in about 1901 with Federation, which is why all the previous Joans who make history are 19th century Joans or colonial Joans, and she's an Australian Joan. She is a Joan of post-Federation Australia. She is a 20th century Joan. She is a modern Joan. Now, this modern Joan, she has an ordinary life. She has an ordinary life. She has a husband. She has a child. They have ups and downs in their marriage. They have a life. And is that not what history is? Because when you tell history only from the big important men and the big important deeds, an awful lot of people vanish. Now, and are they the things that make history? Is history governed by the actions of individual people? Or is history a collective thing, something we all share in? Are we all not making history as we move through the world? History and your mark in history is always shown in hindsight. You do not know what mark you're making in history. You don't know that that photograph you took is the photograph that we will remember of Ned Kelly. You don't know that the strange white man who stepped onto your shore is Matthew Flinders, the man who mapped the country. You don't know that. You just know there's funny white men to him. That is how history works. History is not something that is signposted. And to make history, you live. And just because Joan, any of these Joans, lived, gives them a place in history. It gives them a worth. They all make history because they all come before us. It's a very different way of viewing history. It is a way of viewing history that Miles Franklin would not have understood, because her world was a world where history was still viewed in the big men, big events. And Joan initially thinks this. But across the course of the novel, it's not that Joan relinquishes her desire to make history. It's that she accepts that history is not made from big events only. History is also made by ordinary people working and living their lives. That's how you make history. You live your life. And this is a history that we have increasingly come to value. We have increasingly come to value people's history who don't leave a lot of big footprint marks, who often don't leave a lot of documentary marks, which makes them very hard to find. But it's the opening up of this history that allows history to become more than just powerful white men with money. It allows history to become women. It allows history to become working class people, middle class people who may not be noticed particularly, but live their lives, contributed something to their communities, to their families. It's the story of Indigenous people. It is the story of everybody. Everybody has a history, and every history is valid. That's what this book's about. It's not about the fact that Joan relinquishes her place in history. It's that everyone gets a place in history. But you don't know what it's going to be until that time, until your time has passed. So, Joan Makes History. Check it out. And I will see you again with another Australian writer. So, goodbye.
If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.